Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Particle Accelerator, where we talk to future thinking business leaders about how to accelerate their business and grow their team. I'm here today with Mark. Mark, would you please introduce yourself?
My name is Mark Stouse. I am the chairman of Proof Causal AI. We're a platform that allows companies to operationalize causal analytics in a way that hasn't readily been available to this point.
And just give us a brief. Causal analytics is a little heavy term for some folks. Give some ideas of what causal analytics is.
The whole world operates as a network of causes and effects, without which you don't know how you should invest your money. You can't capture the time lag that separates what you do from the outcomes it generates or doesn't generate. Causal AI is one of the four main types of AI, where everyone is most familiar right now, at least with Gen AI. You have analytical AI, autonomous, and causal. For a lot of reasons, causal AI is just starting to come on really hot right now, not the least of which is the increasingly robust legal requirements for causal analytics.
Cool. I'd love to get to know you a little bit better. And the way that I do that is just what was your first job? How did you make your first dollar as a human?
Sacked groceries.
Yeah, for me, as a paper route. And yeah, we all got to start somewhere. Where were you when you were sacking groceries?
It's a place called Kroger's, a grocery store in Houston. And I was legal to work, but not yet legal to drive. I think my dad that summer just wanted to ensure that I had a robust understanding of what would happen if I didn't apply myself to my studies.
Right.
It had the desired effect.
Good. What toy or hobby that you had as a child influenced what you do career wise today?
That's a great question. I don't know what necessarily classifies it as a hobby, a thirst for knowledge and understanding. I was a bookworm deluxe, and I started reading at a fairly young age about Socratic methods of understanding different kinds of logic, things like that. At the time I was doing it, I didn't have any clue what it was going to mean for me later, particularly with the advent of AI. When you have that kind of background, it kind of positions you very strongly in the current environment of AI. I would say that's one example. The other is history. You study history enough, and occasionally I'm a pretty serious historian of the history of technology, particularly in the Renaissance period. If you go deeply enough into history, you turn into a futurist, right? You start out with pattern match identification, which is correlation, and then you realize that's not the whole deal. That's what brings you into causation.
Are you running across people who are trying to build stock trading bots and come up with some kind of causal algorithm to increase wealth? Yeah. As you're speaking, I automatically go to causal. Okay. Can I run a stock trading bot that makes me money?
I think clearly you can, and there are those bots out there already. In our particular case, we're more focused on companies seeking to understand how it operates and why it operates as it does, why it performs as it does in a current market environment, which is the wild card. Roughly 70% of reality is stuff you don't control. And that is mirrored in the models, in the causal models. And so it's really about how well are you surfing a wave that keeps changing and iterating. Another analogy would be the GPS. It tells you where you are. You tell it where you want to go. It gives you three choices. You pick one and you're off to the races. And then what was a really good route suddenly changes because there's an accident ahead and the traffic is piling up, and all of a sudden GPS says, "Hey, Benjamin, you know what? This was great, but it's not great anymore. I'm going to reroute you." And that's causal analytics in action right there. And that's really what we do at a company level.
Yeah, that's cool. I was an early founder, advisor. I wrote some of the first code for a company called Arrivalist. We had this assumption that if you were traveling, then you were more likely to adopt new products. Think about like when I'm traveling, I might try a new shampoo, or when I'm traveling, I'm just more open to new ideas. And so we could tell from ad signal that you were not in the place that you used to be, that you were traveling in and out of maybe a tourism board. And so you were showing you a travel ad, showing you new products. And it was amazing how there seemed to be some causal relationships between being in motion and being open to adopt new ideas and new products. That company eventually sold, but it was largely successful in terms of helping tourism boards determine that their marketing was effective, like they were actually going to Vegas or Nashville, all from this assumption that there was a causal signal between being in motion and showing up in a new place.
Yeah, so that would be an example of correlation, not causality. Correlation is a one-to-one relationship between two things, but the world happens as a multivariable network of causes and effects. If you're not accounting for at least the ones, right? Because you're never going to have a perfect model. But what we can say definitively is that it's not a one-to-one thing. What you're talking about would play into a causal model. In this particular situation, location was definitely something we need to be factoring into this larger model. We are all, as people, hardwired to think correlatively because it's easier, it burns less mental energy. It's the way our intuitions work. It's all that kind of stuff, right? But the problem with correlation, when you're right, you're really right. And when you're wrong, you're really wrong. And that kind of binary aspect to it is very,
Is it true that if you're right, then what you discovered is that something you thought was corollary was actually causal? When you're wrong,
in that moment in time, in that situation. So you can't make a blanket statement on this applies to anything. You can't make a blanket statement about this is always going to be causal, change circumstances, and it won't be. A great example of this would be during COVID, channels and types of campaigns that had worked really well, causally speaking, suddenly didn't work at all. It's because the circumstances in the world had changed to such an extent that it obviated prior truth. And people don't like that. They like to believe that once true, and yet we all know experientially that's not the case.
yeah. So what's coming up for me here is I'm a company and I got logistics and I'm floating stuff across the ocean. And all of a sudden, I have this new model and I need to take in weather data, but that doesn't have anything to do with my core business. Are you finding that folks are seeking new data sets and new data sources to be more effective with their causal model?
The way causality operates, right, is it starts with a question and it's a reverse engineering process all the way down to the inputs. What you measure, just like what you do as a result of what you learn from the model, what you measure is going to be dictated by the model. And so one of the things that clients figure out all the time is I've been collecting data on a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. And it costs me a ton of money to acquire it, to store it, to secure it. And so if it's really truly irrelevant, they just cease measuring those things, right? Because the model will tell you what you need to know. And the model will also, because of the confidence scores, tell you if there's something out there that limits how well this model explains real life, whether it's the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, right? You're never going to get it all, but you can build a statistically significant enough model to be able to make better and better decisions, which is the whole deal, because the ability to make better and better decisions at whatever cadence you need to make them is what triggers the law of compounding.
What occurs to me here is that I may be collecting some data asset. It's just part of the way I do my business. It's something that I've been observing because it's part of my core competency, but it's just my operating data. And while that may be trivial to me as one business, may be gold to another business.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah.
Maybe the thing that they have no visibility over, but it totally impacts their models and decision making. Maybe there was bourbon involved, but ideating with some chaps of mine, And we were like talking, man, if there was really the data marketplace that upheld certain anonymized standards, so there's no PII. It's not super raw data, but it's like the vector of a certain thing. And then you could exchange these. I think they do this in scientific research, or you can buy data sets. There are different data stacks that could impact your business and help you make better decisions.
Yeah, one of the things that's really cool right now, largely because of AI and automation, is that even data that would normally be thought of as highly customized and specific can be collected on spec very cheaply. And so it's amazing what you can buy legally, ethically, right? There's a lot out there that you would say to yourself initially, wow, there's no way that anybody has data on this. Think again.
What do you think is the most far out thing that you've seen in terms of data that you didn't think you could buy? I thought that in online advertising, you can buy anonymized buying patterns, like what people are buying, how often they shop at Victoria's Secrets. You might not be able to tag it to an email or a person, but you can certainly know in this geography, this number of people buy these types of products, and at face value, that can be pretty interesting. But what's the most creepy on that creepy scale?
I don't know if it's I wouldn't call it creepy, particularly within the climate change study arena, right? There is data available that, and you're sitting there going, when you see it, you're sitting there going, somebody actually thought of that, right? And then you realize a millisecond later, AI thought of it. Somebody ran a series of prompts saying, what are things that we should be looking at that we haven't even thought of? And AI can come up with some of that. It's not perfect all the time, but it's really remarkable. The other thing that's really interesting that has truly revolutionized big parts of causal AI is about 3 years ago, the use of synthetic data to war game and to do counterfactual analysis has been around for a long time. But because of its complexity and the costs associated with it, it was pretty much the province of nation states and militaries. About 3 years ago, it became possible to generate large data sets of very high fidelity data simulating a particular well-described situation and run it as a counterfactual model. That a counterfactual, for those that don't know, is it could be roughly explained as a what if. What if we'd done this instead of this? What if this had happened and not this? That's what you're looking for. And so you have to use synthetic data because you're asking about things that didn't actually happen. And data is always and only about the past. Natural data, real data is always and only about the past. Something had to happen for you to be able to measure. And so all of a sudden being able to generate large amounts of very high quality synthetic data to simulate different outcomes on a future back basis as opposed to the past forward, which is normal, that was amazing.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I think of that, the what if scenarios. Certainly you could say, what if I had bought this stock back then? How much money would I have today? I can see that with trended models. But
At that point, that's just a measurement exercise.
so what use cases have you seen for that what if model, and how do you feel like they added a benefit?
A really great one is, let's say that you're a founder of a startup and you're pre-rev. So you have no data, you're pre-operational and you're trying to raise money. Investors typically in the past would look at your pro forma financials and go, this is the founder's dream, and had very little basis in causal reality. Today, we can very quickly and inexpensively generate an entire array of synthetic models, bracket the likelihood of different outcomes for that startup based on different marketplace realities. It's still a scenario or a series of scenarios. In the same way that a storm tracking model is a series of scenarios, it's called the spaghetti model. You probably have seen it on a TV weather report or something like that, where you have all the squiggly lines that represent different possible routes for the hurricane. And then some of them start to attrit and other ones collapse on a core root. That's a pretty good description of what these models would be like for a startup. And so
It makes sense.
it
So given an infusion of cash, like $2 million, you deploy it in these ways based on the model. Those ways work in some varying degree. And then you have a certain amount of churn based on different factors. You're creating a scenario that's not just linear variables. There's at least some assumption of the reasons why I might acquire customers and the reasons why they might churn out. And that could be very loosely based on reality and then extrapolated out based on the infusion of cash.
Yeah, and also clearly the 70 to 75% of the model is going to be externalities outside of the founder's control or anyone's control. So again, we're talking about how well do you deal with all of these factors that you don't control? One of the great screw ups in venture capital 20, 25 years ago was the idea based largely on correlation and pattern match that you could make startups largely deterministic. And that is just a fantasy. It has no basis in reality at all. We're not talking about
Yes.
the laws here. We're not talking about the law of gravity. We're talking about people.
Sometimes getting to the first 100 customers is a math exercise, but getting to the first thousands has tons of other factors. Yeah, it can't be linear all the way through. It's not just a
No,
matter of
it's
pumping.
totally nonlinear. Actually, there's very little linearity in causal equations outside of the physical sciences. And even in the physical sciences, there's a lot of nonlinearity.
Yeah, I know we're talking about AI here, but what tech trend or what's really made, maybe a better way for me to ask this is why now? So you're doing the business that you're doing, AI is emerging. Why is causal analytics like why now? And what tech trend is just impacting you and how are you guys responding?
Yeah, I'll have to be honest with you. The people process technology triangle is not equilateral, it's profoundly scaling. And the longest side of all is always people. So it's really the people trend that drives the ship much more than the tech. So, how open people are is a big part of it. Are there other factors out there that make this very timely as opposed to pushing a rock uphill? The Delaware rulings in 2023 and 2024 around fiduciary duty completely changed that whole situation and made it as big as probably ever was, is a huge tailwind for us and for anybody in causal analytics, because all of a sudden individual officers are accountable and liable for how well they mitigate shareholder risk. How do you know what the risks are and how do you know you're mitigating them? There's only one way to do it causally, right? That is a factor that nobody could have anticipated or created, and yet it's hugely impactful on our business. I would say that the overall speed with which, or coming back to people's expectations of technology, everyone expects to be able to extract golden nuggets of understanding in seconds. If you can operationalize causal AI at the clock speed of the business, then that's a major win. The real market differentiation is how well you enable the customer to operationalize it in their business.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that over my career. It's like the barrier of entry is really reducing to do things right and do them in a sophisticated way. My first startup in 2001 was converting a storefront travel agency to an online travel agency. We had to, I don't want to take away from Al Gore here, but I felt like I was building the internet in a storefront building. Now I just push 2 clicks and have elastic server resources available for a business and it's paid on demand rather than in a capital expenditure. That's a huge difference for what it takes to launch something significant. And the barrier of innovation is so reduced. Now it's more, but I love what you said about,
I would suggest the barrier to executing innovation is much reduced. The barrier to thinking of it correctly is either the same or more complex. And this is really where the synergy is between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. You need both. You can't, one does not replace the other. They complement each other. And the innovation, the raw idea is most of the time going to be from the human being because it's so contextual. And the one thing that AI struggles with because it doesn't live in the real sense is context.
Yeah, that takes me to an interesting place. I love what you said about the people in the middle, or that it still matters how it connects with people. I think what I'm finding is that if I want to emotionally connect with the work, then the amount of AI, I remember when I was a kid, I was playing role playing games, and there was a particular role playing game called Shadowrun. As people started adding implants for certain enhancements and bonuses, they lost their humanity score. And so I think we live in an interesting time that as we incorporate AI into the process, the AI will personalize things and make it factor in more data points. But I still think that the word artificial is in the name. And so if we want to connect with people emotionally, we have to keep AI out of it. Even if I really want to connect with something, I was in a Bible study and the effort was to create a personal Psalms. So I put a bunch of personal details in there, get my Psalms out of there. But then when I go to read it in front of people, it just doesn't hit. The people who worked without AI and wrote it down, they're connecting emotionally with their piece of work. And so I accomplished the task, but I missed the point. And so I think marketers should be a little bit careful about vibe marketing all their AI stuff if they want it to connect emotionally with their audience. It makes us all very transactional when it comes to our
Well,
different
actually,
issues.
that's the reason why Darwinism is really a theory in crisis right now, because it does not account for that. It's a very deterministic approach. The paradox on determinism is for determinism to work, you have to know it all. You have to literally be omniscient, right? You could argue, which is interesting to watch the secular scientists do, that there's only one truly determinist being in the universe, and that would be God. There's a catch 22 in a lot of this that presents real problems for something like Darwinism. And in fairness to Charles Darwin, he was working with what he could observe. And there was so much that he didn't know and didn't understand. And that's true for all of us. It should give us all pause before we pile on Charles Darwin or whoever it happens to be. We are just as ignorant in some way. A physicist that was a mentor of mine could tell that I was very proud of my knowledge. So he proceeded Socratically through questions to show me what a very small percentage of the world I knew about and understood, which at that time, as 30 years ago, caused me great consternation and almost like an existential crisis. And I was like, what's the point then? What's the point of knowing anything? He said, Mark, you got to use your knowledge to curate your ignorance. And he said, that's what learning is. Learning is waking up every morning and confronting how little you understand and how today your job is to whittle away at that just a little bit, knowing that you will never get all the way.
Yeah, I heard a statement that like legacy isn't about, it's what you create that outlasts you. It's not about what you leave behind. So it's not about, okay, like I give my kids an inheritance. It's what I put into motion while I'm on the earth that continues past that motion, generates future things. That's the causal and analytical definition of legacy. That's awesome. I was in the car with my son. He's, Dad, would I get rich being a construction worker? And I'm like, you can get rich at anything. What you're really asking me, he asked if he should go to school. Does he have to go to college to make a lot of money in construction? Because there's a lot of construction around us. And I was like, you'll make money if you're wise. And wisdom is special knowledge, street smarts, and emotional intelligence. And I gave him a definition of each of those three. And he's, I think I'm pretty good at school. And I know not to go places that are risky. So I think I'm pretty street smart. But my sister, man, I don't understand her at all. And that's just called being a man, my friend.
There are things in life that transcend our ability to understand or model. There's a guy in England, he's an Oxford Don, who's very much part of the causal analytics community. His specialization is causal modeling the divine. To say that he has been spectacularly unsuccessful is just doesn't even begin to cut it. And he's brilliant. I've talked to him twice and I just said, has it ever occurred to you that perhaps this is a misapplication of the technique? He was so invested in the idea that somehow you could model the divine that he could not imagine his life having walked away from that. And that is a very human thing. That's the Don Quixote complex right there in a nutshell.
To bring it down a level, as you're modeling the divine, what came to me is the healthcare industry, like how people become better when they really weren't supposed to, or supposed to based on the treatment plan, and how people don't that have received all the treatments, right? Like our bodies are such uniquely different, and there's so many factors and so many complex systems working together that I bet it's really, if you applied causal modeling to some different treatment plans, how interesting that might be to really figure out what actually does work or what just looks like it works when applied with other factors. Almost no weight loss treatment works if you're not doing diet and exercise.
So, an example of this actually in real life would be that if we look at medical research, they are using both patterns and causality to achieve a scalable answer. When we transfer that to the practice of medicine by doctors and nurses, that is almost entirely pattern match. It it works a lot largely because the reality of human systems, physical systems, is not highly volatile, right? So you've got a basis for a pattern, but this is why a lot of times doctors take it too far and treat everybody the same. They're not looking at symptomology that would separate this patient out and require maybe a different take on it. And that's why you've got enough people getting better, right, that they stick with it, but also you've got a certain percentage, a lot of times reasonably high, that don't. And that is a great exemplar of the difference between purely correlation, pattern match type stuff and causality. Problem is that doing a full-on causal workup on every patient individually is really what a researcher does when they get a bunch of people together as a sample. That's really what they're doing. It's not economically viable to do it at the hospital level.
They end up having to throw out all the data that doesn't match the pattern so that they can really narrow focus and to get the story that they're wanting to tell. Very interesting. What are some of the most significant gaps between your ambitions and the realities of today?
People are in a very difficult place right now. AI has accentuated that greatly, both in reality and in the propaganda around it. People feel the velocity of the change. They feel the volatility of the change. They know that they'll have serious gaps in some cases in terms of being able to operate effectively in that kind of environment. More than a tool, AI is becoming an ambient reality. It's like we're fish swimming in the ocean, but we don't perceive the ocean. Pretty soon we will not perceive AI. It will just be the water we swim in. And people are aware of that happening. They may not be able to say it the way I just did, but get it. And it's very unsettling. And when someone is really unsettled, they're typically not open to ideas. Just like what you were talking about earlier, they are very closed to new ideas right now because it is evaluated through a lens not of opportunity, which is what you were describing through travel, but risk. The way we talk to people about causal AI has had to stay current with where people are.
I agree with that. When you see the adoption curve happening and you're not an early adopter, you tend to wait. If you're not going to buy the first iPhone, then you're going to wait for, okay, is it the iPhone that I get or is it the Android? You're waiting to see where this goes.
The pattern match behavior.
But yeah, I feel that too. And I like the way you said that is it's just, I'm waiting to see where this all shakes out. Because if I get in too early, maybe I'll make a mistake. I think that risk feels very relevant.
The problem is that it's moving so fast that if you don't move with it to some degree, by the time you decide that it's real and you need to do it, you're going to be so far behind. It's a real problem. Anyone who's ever had a calculus class, for example, and let's say you get sick, you get the flu, and you have to miss 3 days of calculus class, and then you come back into the class, you are at a severe disadvantage.
For sure.
That's how fast the gap opens up around calculus, right? AI is very similar, right? It's like when people are exposed to real-time data, which is really only meant for machines and computers. There's so many studies on this, it's not even funny, right? People decelerate, they downshift in the face of real-time data. Why is that? They're waiting to get enough context to make a safe decision, which completely obviates the advantage of real-time data. We're confronting huge paradoxes right now, and it's going to be really tough. And then stuff like the Delaware rulings on fiduciary duty and the personal liability of officers now, that is compressing it even further. While your personal liability as an officer is probably covered by an E&O insurance policy, your reputational situation isn't. And so if you make a bad call that you were negligent, it's going to harm your career.
So when you make big decisions based on the Delaware ruling, you will have to be called in. You'll have to say, this is the data that I was looking at that guided my decision. In a sense, that will save you because you'll be like, I was looking at this particular data. These are the trends I saw.
It's not just the data. Data is a raw material that is synthesized into something with utility known as a decision through analytics. Using data only means you're always looking at the past. And now things are so volatile and they're moving so fast that everybody's going, man, that isn't working anymore. I got to be able to be raising my headlights up and seeing further down the road. The only way to do that is with analytics. That's not my opinion. That's just factual reality.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm interested to learn more about this Delaware law. Let me ask you, what lessons have you learned, or what's been the most significant lesson that you've learned from a tech initiative that failed to deliver expected value?
That even with all of my knowledge and understanding, I still fall victim to the same hubris, the same kind of unconscious determinism, the same belief that I can make it happen. I think the entrepreneurial journey, and I don't mean just creating a business, I think the act of creating tech or whatever is inherently entrepreneurial, even if you're working for somebody. I think it is very humbling, and it is the role of an entrepreneurial leader, not to be melodramatic about it, but in most cases, it is the path of suffering, which is not something you hear a lot about, but it is really true. We only focus on the less than 1% of founders that hit it out of the ballpark. We don't focus on everybody else. And you learn, I think if you're open to it, and it takes a while to become open to it if you choose to, there's nothing that will make you a better person faster and more surely than being an entrepreneur, because you come face to face with the truth of yourself in ways that get papered over in a large organization. And so that's really my answer, right? I used to think, to be really honest about it, when a product failed a long time ago, 10, 15 years ago, I would say the market's just stupid. No, actually, that was my own ignorance, my own hubris talking. Doesn't mean that I was a bad person in that situation, but I got over my skis One of the things that I constantly work on right now is that because I do tend to see further forward than maybe most people, right? I always am too far ahead of the market. And so one of the ways that I use AI is I will say, hey, I'm thinking about this, and AI and I will talk about it. And these are really trained, highly cultivated AI instances. And so I get minimal hallucination. And then I will say, so am I too ahead of the market? And they go, yeah, you need to sit on that one for a while. And it bugs the crap out of me, but I know that it's right.
I think for me, if I blame the market too much, then there's this victimhood kind of situation. And I've seen entrepreneurs convince themselves that their particular ICP can't be marketed to. And they're basically just saying, I'm misunderstood, but they've thrown their hands up in the terms of, okay, then how can I be better understood? Do I need a different spokesperson? Some of that art of creating is, okay, that's new information.
Yep.
What next?
I think you also have to realize that you, as vendors, the idea that we create demand is pure fiction. Demand is created in the heart of the customer when they perceive a need that is really kicking their butt, right? Initially, we marketed a lot to CMOs. And with the exception of some early adopters, we were getting a huge stiff arm. Even with my own credibility in the mix, we finally had to come to the conclusion that they were not psychologically ready for this. And so we started marketing and selling it to CFOs for CFOs to manage things like marketing. When you run a business, the pragmatic part of the business is every business has an ICP. And if the one that you think is yours isn't working, then it's not yours. And you got to find the one that is.
I always try to think of my employees as capable, but not necessarily having the capacity. I ran into a guy who I wanted to start at 9 a.m. every morning. He was not capable of starting work at 9:30, fine. But try to have a meeting at 9 o'clock, he just wasn't. I was missing half of the equation if I assumed everybody just needed more capacity, improve their skills. Just because you think of somebody isn't capable doesn't mean you're a bad leader. You just have to figure out what could the new boundaries be, or what's a solution around that? Am I willing to work within those capabilities? And I think you're right, like what you said about that you're not creating your demand, you're responding to a need. And you have to be really good at connecting with that need. You need to figure out the need that you do connect with. Otherwise, you just can't fluff something out of nothing. That was a really good point that I'm going to think on even after this. In the interest of your time and the listeners' time, if people like what you've had to share today, how would you like them to reach out to you?
I would say that the best way to reach me is through LinkedIn. I'm very present there. You're far more likely to connect with me quickly there than by email.
Yeah.
The
And
way for
then,
the company is proofanalytics.ai.
great. We'll make sure both those things are in the show notes. But who would you like to have conversations with? Who do you like having conversations with?
I'm there for customers and I don't sell. I more like help. If you really want to talk or text or whatever about questions related to causal AI and how to understand what's working and not working in the context of the marketplace in your business, feel free to reach out to me. You can do it in public in front of God and country. You can send me an email. It doesn't matter to me. I'll definitely answer.
Man, I really appreciate your time, Mark. This has been an awesome discussion. I appreciate your perspective and this really cool field that you're in.
Thank you.